Let's go ahead and get started. And just right off the bat, everyone, we are recording this session and it'll be up on our YouTube channel at the end of the program. And I will send out a link to that YouTube channel to everyone who registered, so you can share it with others if you'd like to that weren't able to attend. My name's Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the executive director of the Ohio chapter, and I'm also moderator of the planning webcast series. And for our Ohio chapter members, if you're unfamiliar with the planning webcast series, head over to our website, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. So we have almost every Friday, we have a webcast through the webcast series. And it's free to all members of the Ohio chapter, and it's worth CM credits. But every now and again, and this is a nationwide program, but every now and again, there is a topic that is particular to just Ohio that we really want to zone in on. And today's topic is one of those. And so today we are going to learn about planning for electric vehicles in Ohio. Specifically, we're going to look at Dublin's electrification journey. At the state conference just a few months ago, I was on a panel with J.M. Rayburn from the City of Dublin, and I just loved what he had to say. So I went back and said, hey, we need to pull a webinar together and get this out to our Ohio folks. And JM then he also invited his friend Sherry Kish from HNTB, and they all can do more introductions if they'd like to. I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to close up my camera here, and I'm just going to let you, JM and Sherry, kind of take things. Oh, if you have questions, type them in the Q&A box, and we'll get to those at the end of their presentation. We have some time blocked off just for questions and answers. So JM, Sherry, take it away.
Thank you so much, Chris, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I appreciate you joining us during your lunch hour to talk about what I think is a very exciting topic, and I hope to share those as well. We want to thank APA Ohio for giving us the stage, so to speak, to share a little bit about the industry of electric vehicles and also what we're doing in Dublin. So I am J.M. Rayburn. I am a city planner, and I work for the City of Dublin's Division of Transportation and Mobility, and I'm joined by Sherry.
On mute. Hi, I'm Sherry Kish. I'm here in the Columbus, Ohio office of HNTB, which is an engineering firm that's been around in this country for over 100 years, and just excited to be here.
All right, well, let's dive in. So for today's presentation, we want to cover a few different items. We want to talk about what we do at Dublin and how our Division of Transportation Mobility has set us up to take on EVs as well as other things that we're responsible for in the City of Dublin. Sherry will help us understand a little bit more the industry and where EVs are heading. So we have an EV 101 section. We'll talk about national and Ohio trends in the industry. And then we'll talk about Dublin's as an example or case study of how we started our electrification journey and things that we've done along the way, and then where we are today and how we are looking forward as we look at electric vehicles. And then we'll talk about best practices, things you should do, things you shouldn't do. And then we'll think about what's some funding out there, because some of this infrastructure is not cheap. So we acknowledge that and we want to help everyone out. So I want to talk a little bit about Dublin and why I think we are an interesting case study for the topic of electric vehicles. It really goes back down. It really ties back to our vision set forward by city leadership and city council. They have a vision for Dublin to be the most connected, the most sustainable, connected, and resilient global city of choice. You see how that trickles down in 3 different buckets as it relates to city services and operations. And so as we think about that perspective, how that transfers into our work is we have areas of focus from the top, looking at traffic signals, school zone operations, things of that nature, streetlights. Going to the right, mobility, that is something that's very important to us, helping people get from point A to point B if they don't have a car or cannot drive. We think about wayfinding to help get around. Connected Dublin's our exciting area of connected technology and connected infrastructure and vehicles. We always care about safety, as every public agency does. Safety is probably the biggest driver in a lot that we do. And of course, we help our friends in the city planning department and engineering departments when we think about development review and those who are looking to build something in our community, making sure it's all the boxes. We recently did a greenhouse gas inventory. This was a great exercise for us to get a baseline of what is our contribution as a community and where can we improve. We looked at we looked at 4 different areas of our operations, and looking at transportation definitely is the largest contributor of emissions in our community. And as a per capita basis, we also see there's a lot that we contribute in our transportation sector. So we see that as opportunities for improvement, and that's where electric vehicles come in. So I'll hand it over to Sherry for EV 101.
Awesome. So JM asked me just to give kind of a baseline understanding of electric vehicles as well as EV charging and what some of the trends are. So we're going to walk through a little bit. This is going to be a little fast because we have a lot of slides, but the goal was at the end, when you have access to the slides, you can still go back and read these nuggets in a little bit more detail. Okay, so next slide. So EVs are actually back. They're not new. They've been here before. In 1900, 90% of taxi cabs in New York City were actually electric vehicles. 20 years earlier, Thomas Edison had created and received a patent for the light bulb, which then ended up leading to infrastructure being developed and used throughout New York City, which is how it leveraged electric vehicles coming onto the scene. So people liked electric vehicles, right? They were cleaner, quieter, they didn't vibrate as much, they were immediately ready to go when you sat in them. No one needed to get in and crank the vehicle. That was difficult and dangerous. So they were really working well. They had actually taken a skating rink on Broadway and turned it into their battery changing location. So they'd pull a vehicle in, take out a 1,300-pound battery and replace it, and then the vehicle would be back on the go. Unfortunately, around 1907, about 300 of the taxis were caught in a fire, and that business did not survive anymore. Horses returned for a short period of time, and then the spark plugs were created, which made internal combustion engines and vehicles safer and more viable. So those ended up taking off. So part of the lesson there was that infrastructure allowed electrification to happen. And that's a lot of the discussion that you're hearing right now is people are worried about electric infrastructure and how is that going to keep building out for to make this successful. Okay, next slide. So just some terms, you've probably seen some of these, you might know some of them, but just want to make sure you have a level set of understanding. ICE, internal combustion engine. If you know an EV driver, you can say, have you been iced? That means that an ICE vehicle has parked in their EV spot or at an EV charger, and they do not like that. So they will say they've been iced. Battery electric vehicle, that's what we're talking about mainly when we're talking about electric vehicles. You've got the plug-in hybrid vehicles, and of course, hybrids have both gas and battery. So you have the electric portion, but you're also able to still use some other form of energy to travel. Zero emission vehicles, you'll see a lot around zero emission grants right now. So that's pretty popular. So you'll see ZEV a lot. Total cost of ownership for all of us that are looking at possibly owning an EV. That's really important to truly understand what the cost is from the moment that you drive off the dealership to what you might need at home and how to charge. Time of use, electricity rates. Electricity rates change over the day, especially out with chargers. So that's important. Tapering, something that some people don't know, battery chargers do, the battery itself, as it charges, it gets slower as it fills. So you'll hear a lot of EV owners saying you stop charging at 90%, you never actually make it to 100. That last 10% takes a really long time to fill. And then range anxiety, again, something that is out there right now. You're hearing it in the news. That's why we're building a national network of EV chargers. Next slide. So there isn't just one electric vehicle, right? We've already said that there's hybrids and electric vehicles, but then there's lots of vehicles in between. And I love that the second one from the left is the stop-start technology. Almost all of us have that in our car now, and I never considered myself a hybrid vehicle owner. But that starts us off at the most basic. So mainly what we're going to be focusing on today is the middle electric vehicle there, the battery electric. And that's mainly what people are talking about when they're talking about a full electric vehicle. Next slide. Here are some of the EV models that are out today that you can buy. They range anywhere. You can see you're in the low 200s for electric range up to over 300 there. The bottom left, the Tesla Model 3 is up to the 358. And so all of these differences in each of these vehicles really do end up making a difference later with how you charge and what you need. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the different types of charging, but these all satisfy different people, right? You may be okay. Like I have in-laws that are they're both retired and they're looking at a lower range vehicle because they only go back and forth to the grocery store and things like that, where I've got another family member who travels all the time. So they're looking at how can I get the most range out of it. So fortunately, these, have gone from 2 options to many options, and have really started being more available, especially after the pandemic. Next slide. So what's most popular in the US? So this is just through 2022, but you can see out of the top 5, Tesla makes up the top 4, right? They were very available as a pure electric vehicle. And so that was really out there. And I was joking to myself as I was preparing this, thinking about the Ford Mustang Mach-E, because I was a former Mustang owner. And there's a lot of Mustang owners that joke that it's not really a Mustang, but it is a very sharp looking EV. So it is definitely done well and is very popular and is very nice even on the inside. So I can attest to how pretty those are. Next slide. Okay. AFV registration. So this is new alternative fuel vehicle registrations. Should have been on my other slide with the AFV there. So this means anybody basically that is registering a new alternative fuel vehicle, which electric falls in that. And so you can see over time in Ohio from January of 2020 up through just October of this year, we are over 4%. In that adoption rate, which is awesome. And adoption basically is just looking at how many are registered new. So we're really changing the trend from 2020 to 2023. I can tell you that spike that you see in March of 2020 on the left-hand side of the slide, where you see the adoption rate went up, but the registrations were lower. That is because Tesla was still able to continue selling at that time, and the registrations had already happened. So they were being delivered. So they were still moving off the lot. So next slide. So let's bring it a little closer to home. Here you can see that in Ohio is the top. So this is talking again about registrations of new vehicles. Ohio has about over 8 million cars registered. And if you go all the way over to the right, you can see that that's a 3.4, so less than the 4% because we're talking about August through October. But still, you can see the trend going up. What's neat to point out is obviously Dublin, the reason we are here, has over 39,000 total vehicles registered, but their adoption rate over the past 3 months has been 9.24%, very impressive, and it's continued to move steadily. So it's very exciting to see that. And then of course, all of our other friends here in the Central Ohio region, we have your numbers on there as well. You can see Upper Arlington performing well and New Albany performing well. And some of those numbers will come into perspective when we look at who's buying EVs. So next slide. So again, if we break down those top EV registrations in Dublin specifically, look at those top 5 again. You still have all 4 of the Teslas in there. So they are definitely leading the charge when we look at registrations. Next slide. So how are we going to be doing this in the future? What's going to be happening? This took 4 independent forecasts and built one larger forecast, which ended up showing, basically, if you look at, there's all 5 of them there, but the EEI took the other 4 and tried to package them together and make one forecast. But it's saying that 5.6 million annual EV sales will be taking place in 2030. So again, as we're thinking about what our infrastructure looks like, we have to be ready for it. And that's where you see a lot of the national programs and funding really focused on the infrastructure piece of it. And while there are credits for the vehicles, it's still the focus on the underlying piece is really building that infrastructure out. So that'll be 26 million total EVs on the road if they hit that forecast of sales in 2030 with the ones that are existing and then new. So next slide. So who buys EVs? What we do know, and I was just telling Christine and JM this morning, I'm in an equity of electrification meeting for the state of Ohio today, and we talked a lot about when the state's been going around and meeting with all the different cities that the exposure to EVs has been the #1 reason that a lot of people have been moving to consider them as vehicles, because they've actually sat in them. They've done a test drive. They've learned about them. They understand them. So it's really increasing their consideration to move that direction. Leading buyers of EVs has been men, but it's moving towards millennials, followed by the Gen X men. We know that over 70% of EV buyers are men, but with traditional vehicles at 60%. EV buyers skew toward the more affluent. We saw some of the pricing on those cars. They're not cheap, and the used market really isn't available. And a lot of our graphs earlier really focused on new registrations for new vehicles. But it is starting to move towards mass market buyers. And the average EV buyer credit score there fell from 800 in 2019 down to 788. Doesn't seem like a huge move, but it is as you start to move towards the mass market. So when we talked about Upper Arlington, New Albany, and Dublin, those sometimes are affiliated with more affluent areas. And so that's why we're seeing the registration numbers higher, and they're in the adoption rate there. The other thing we know is that longer commutes mean increased consideration. There are a lot of people since the pandemic who have started saying, like, they have to go back to the office, and now that means something to them. So they want to look at other alternate ways to not have to stop at a gas station to lengthen their commute. Next slide. So what drives the EV market? Emission standards. I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of the articles in the paper. The feds are coming down to the original equipment manufacturers, the OEMs, and saying you need to have lower emissions in your vehicles, and they're setting goals for them that are increasingly, I don't want to say harder to attain. They see it that way, but it's forcing a lot of them to move into electrification to be able to meet those new standards across their product line. Incentives, obviously there are federal incentives out there for buying new and used EVs. Vehicle availability is getting better. Battery technology improvements. I talked to someone who had a 70-mile range on his vehicle. It is a used vehicle, but he had a 70-mile range. Now we're talking about over 350. So very exciting changes there. Preference for EV driving experience. If you have not been a passenger or driven an EV, I highly suggest it. Going in a safe way, find a safe area, but have your driver or yourself hit the gas as hard as you can and get up as fast as you can. It just gives that immediate rush of speed. It's really fun. I hope there are no police listening, at least here in Columbus. Fuel prices, fuel prices are rising. Electricity is cheaper right now to be able to charge at home. Association with other EV owners. I'm actually sitting next to someone from Drive Electric Dayton. It's an amazing organization. They really have a family. They get together, all the EV owners in Dayton, and they do events together. And they really you can tell there's just this camaraderie that's really cool. And then finally, charging infrastructure availability. We know that hasn't been driving it, but this new push towards it, better understanding, education, signage are really going to help move that forward. So let's talk EV charging. There are 3 ways. Again, this is baseline information, so some of you may know this, but there are 3 ways right now that are the most popular for charging. Level 1, this is basically, you can plug an EV into your house. Right now, you don't need anything else. You can just plug it in with a charger that it comes with, but it will take you a very long time. It might take you 2 days to go ahead and get all the charge you need to go somewhere, but it's available, right? Again, go back to that retirement scenario. You have a car that can go over 200 to 300 miles. You plug it in, you take it out to your Giant Eagle, your Kroger, wherever, you come back and you charge it again, and it's ready again in 2 days when you have to go back out. No big deal, right? Level 2 is generally what you see in a residence, though. So this is going to give you that overnight charge. Someone uses it all day to go to work. It sits there. They go run to the store, do all those things. They charge it overnight. So this is what you're seeing at people's residences as well as out in the public. So think about it, a theme park, a mall, a destination where you might be there all day, or even someplace like a park and ride, or in Dublin, Derry Field. It's a huge soccer field area where I'm there, all day one weekend for my son's soccer tournaments. Someplace that you might be able to sit there and leave your car for a while and not need to sit in your car and wait because you're not going to the next destination. Last on the right is the DC fast charger. This is the one that the NEVI, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Funding, is most focused on. It's the fastest charging. This is the one where we are trying to reduce range anxiety. We're trying to build out a national network across the country to tell people you can own an EV and go on vacation. You can own an EV and be a traveling worker, and you can do this in your car and not be worried about being stuck somewhere without being able to get off, spend 20 to 30 minutes, run and go to the restroom, grab yourself some food, and when you come back out, your car will be charged and ready to go on its way. And for those of you who are a little bit more educated, at the bottom of the DC fast charger, you'll note that there are 3 standards there. Well, I should say 3 charging ways you can charge, 3 plugs. CHAdeMO is very limited use and seems to be going away. CCS1 is the most traditional one that was being considered a standard without being called a standard. That's the one where NEVI funding was saying you need to have a CCS charger port. NACS is the North American Charging Standard. That is what Tesla uses. They have named it themselves the charging standard, even though it isn't a standard, which always makes me laugh. Very good marketing team over there. But they are now on the scene saying, wait a second, we're going to open up all these Tesla chargers to you, because they know that they're going to miss out on a big piece of information or big piece of the money there that is coming in for charging. So now they're making all these deals you've probably heard with all the different original equipment manufacturing owners to have these chargers directly built into their cars. It's going to take a couple years to get that up, but it's something that they're interested in doing. Next slide. So again, this just breaks it down. Again, this is one of those slides. More information, quick hit here will just show you miles per hour of charge and time to recharge just spaced there. The only thing I'll note is at the bottom, that supercharger for Tesla. That is the fastest charger that's out there right now. And Tesla, from what I understand from talking to all of the people around the state, they have the best charging experience, along with, of course, here, the fastest charger, if you can find one of the superchargers. Next slide. Okay, so how do you do this, right? If you go up to a charger and you have your vehicle, how do you do it? There are charging networks, ChargePoint, Blink, Greenlots, EVgo. A lot of them, all you need to do is download their app, put in your information, you plug it in, and they will immediately, recognize your car and just charge you through the app there for your session. And some of them are based per session. You can have rates with them. You can be members. But there are also other apps, like this one is PlugShare. So this one will actually give you information about where are all of these chargers, right? If you're going on a trip and you do need to plan, right? That's the one thing with EVs. Sometimes people like to have that little, it's not like you can stop at every rest stop or every exit and just find a charger. So there is some planning involved right now until we build this network out. But places like PlugShare will give you all of the information you need. And you can see as you walk through to the third picture there, it's got even things like, is it accessible? Is it a pull in? Is it pull through? Is it trailer friendly? Jam's going to show you a picture later where someone uses trailer that shouldn't be using a trailer at one of the chargers. Next slide. So when we look at public EV chargers, specifically in Dublin, what you're going to see that road is 270 that kind of loops from the right side down to the middle. You see chargers, hugging those roadways, and then kind of like at the darker gray line is 33. If you look up on the top left side, you'll see the 33 and follow that gray line. And you see, again, chargers to date have all really been focused right there, hugging the roadways. And so that's what NEVI's funding is for right now. But we're starting to go out, and Dublin's starting to think, okay, what about all of my residents? What about all of my tourists? What about all of the people that come and work in Dublin? What do we need for them, not just for the traveling public? So they're a step ahead of where the states have to be right now with funding. Next one. So again, when we talk about how to charge, we've got that DCFC, that's direct current fast charger, or level 2 ports. So those are the ones that go a little faster, but not snail pace, as level 1. And mostly when you see chargers out in the wild, I'll say, not at home, you're definitely going to see level 2 and level 3, or the DCFC. You generally don't see level 1, but you can see them sometimes for micromobility, scooters, bike share, things like that. So here you can see the breakout starting in 2018 of the chargers, and then that orange line there are the locations. So you can see while they have 80 9 chargers there. There are 25 locations. So generally you have more than one charger at a location to make sure that nobody has to wait. Next slide. So when we break it down for adoption rate in Dublin, if we look back at October of 2023, we've got 2.84%. Next slide. And then these are the new alternative fuel registration in Dublin. And again, this kind of goes back to that other chart that we looked at, but back in October, they had 7.98%, but you see they've always been consistent over 6%. So definitely trending higher than the state all year, but definitely staying in the upper 10s and even up to that 13% in April, which is awesome. I think that's my last slide. Where's your overview? Back to you, JM.
All right, thank you so much, Sherry. And so our electrification journey started roughly 10 years ago. In 2012, we had our first EV charger installed at the rec center. That was a good location because it's a location where a lot of the community congregates for activities or either for, of course, exercise, working out. But there's the Abbey Theater there. There's a lot of activities at that one center. So I think it was a good location to start as we've since then expanded our public and our privately maintained chargers at the city. I believe in 2018, we had our first EV, Nissan Leaf. So we've expanded our fleet since then. We have 10 Nissan Leafs. We have 1 Ford Transit van that's all electric. And then we've purchased hybrid vehicles for our police to increase their fuel efficiency. We have more in mind for purchasing electric vehicles. We'll probably hit a barrier with some of the heavier vehicles as the technology is not quite there. And also thinking about snow plowing, for example, we can't have a snow plow down for like 12 hours or many hours to charge. That may be one of the last things that we are able to transfer over. But in the meantime, sedans, light trucks, things of that nature are ripe for transitioning to electric vehicles, at least in our municipal fleet. Our work has not gone unnoticed. Some of you have seen this slide. I'm going to show it again because I think it's great. It's we were awarded one of the greenest fleets in North America last year. We'll see how we fare this year in the rankings. But it is encouraging that our work has been noticed and we've been able to be recognized for the actions that we're taking to make sure that we have fewer emissions and we have a cleaner operation altogether. As part of that story, I'm excited that we've introduced e-bikes to our staff. And this is not, I mean, we are looking at expanding Pogo, the public bike share, so I don't want to cause any confusion. We're interested in that to serve our public. But in terms of our city operations and our city staff, we've incorporated, we purchased e-bikes, which is one of our ideas from, I believe, our vice mayor. And we were able to cobble together some of the funding to make those purchases this year. So we were able to purchase 2 e-bikes for our police, which you see on the left, and they had special requirements that they needed for their operations. On the right, we had more of a leisurely bike. We did put all the bells and whistles on there. So think of saddlebags for purse or laptop bags, things of that nature. We put on cup holders as well as cell phone holders. So we really want to encourage people to make those quick trips between city buildings without using a car, for example. Oh, and I should mention that I've got more money for next year to purchase this, so I want to continue to build out this program. So this leads us to how we're thinking comprehensively about how we need to forecast and prepare for the future, particularly as it relates to electric vehicle charging infrastructure and our community's adoption of EVs. We kicked off an electric vehicle comprehensive plan with HNTB, Sherry represents, and this is the problem statement that we look to achieve or solve with this problem, or this plan, excuse me. And then the purpose was, again, for us to develop a comprehensive plan of where we need to invest, or maybe where we need to have regulations or policies in place that can help us with getting the development that we need for the future, particularly as it relates to transportation. As we started the number crunching with Sherry and her team, we looked at how many vehicles we currently have. So she mentioned we are in the ballpark of 39,000. We have 1,100 currently registered electric vehicles. So you see the percentage of our fleet that is electric, 2.84%. And we have 89 ports for all those vehicles. So acknowledging that maybe a good bulk of the charging will happen at home where it is feasible, we still need to account for that percentage of the day that people are not at home or they're not charging at home and they're either at the office, they're doing something recreation or leisurely, or they're traveling. So how can we also accommodate that those members of the public? And you can see that we have a ratio. So we'll bounce around this ratio a lot. That's how we're looking at how many vehicle or how many chargers we have to prepare for as we look at the adoption rates. So if we look at, let's say 2030, we'll say that we are expecting a 40% adoption rate based on the research and recommendations that HNTB provides us. That will shake out to be about 20,000 vehicles in our community. And that's not enough for 89 ports is not enough for 20,000 vehicles. So really we need to figure out what is the ratio that we need in order to accommodate what's coming. We looked at best practices around the world. So you'll see below that there's the Dublin ratio, which is existing 12:1. California and Norway, those are what we see as leaders in the industry, particularly as infrastructure. You'll notice that California has their playbook is more focused on level 2 chargers, whereas Norway is more focused on those DC fast chargers. So looking at how that all breaks down, we are able to figure out the best ratio for Dublin. And that may be different for each community in Ohio, but want to give you the methodology of how we were looking at this. So if we look at the EVs and we are looking for, let's say, a ratio of 34:1, I mean, that sounds a lot more than 12:1 right now, but based on the behaviors of charging and what we understand in the industry, we think that is probably going to be appropriate. But that means we need just short of 600 charging like ports or plugs, which sounds really daunting, at least to me, hopefully to you, at least to give you a wake-up call. And thinking about how that is going to shake out with, okay, we have this many chargers that we know we need, but how many of those will be level 2 and how many will be DC fast charging? So that's where we're working through the final kind of policies and numbers right now before we provide recommendations moving forward. But this is where we're trending. And we have to be somewhat ambitious if we want to meet those targets in the next couple of years. So thinking about not only what the city can do with their own public charging locations, but thinking about how we as planners can work with private developers or other development applications that come to our communities, and what do we want or what do we expect to make sure that those developments will be ripe for the future. So that is a great segue to talk about best practices and requirements, things that you want to do and not want to do as we think about bringing this technology to our community. And Sherry, please jump in as well, because I want to make sure I get the whole picture. This is an example of a station that it's a little difficult to reach the charging station. And there's also a lot of cords going on. There's some accessibility concerns here, but also safety concerns. So thinking about what does that look like if you're someone that is mobility impaired or has other limitations? How do you make it so that it can still use the EV infrastructure? Again, this is not helpful for anyone who cannot get out, who's not able-bodied. We do anticipate there'll be some chargers for people who are using handicap parking. So we want to make sure that we are making sure that the infrastructure is accessible for everyone. This does not work. One, even for someone who's able-bodied, I wouldn't want to go into a very muddy area because it looks very muddy from the photo. So thinking about, again, the full experience, Sherry mentioned that Tesla has been known for having great experiences with the charging. And I think that's something that we want to think about as the public side is implementing some of these systems. Oh, this makes me so anxious, this one. Love bike lanes, love EVs. Sometimes they don't work together, but they can if you're very thoughtful about it. This is just looking to clothesline a bicyclist, and it's unfortunate. So things to avoid, we definitely one of these, safety for sure. Here is an interesting kind of overload, if you will, of one site with a lot of different chargers, but thinking about what is actually feasible and realistic in terms of someone filling those spaces and using those chargers and using it in a way that's convenient.
And JM, I think what's interesting about this one is that someone apparently spent money to bring in 6 chargers. but there are only 4 parking spots to use those 6 chargers, and the other 2 are unusable. So it's just, you don't, especially as expensive as these are, you don't want to be wasting money.
Or creating a target for yourself if someone's like, this is not a smart use of money and technology.
Exactly.
Oh, you want to spell check things? You want to do some quality control. If you didn't notice restricted, it's totally spelled wrong. But there's, this is little things like that that you want to make sure you get right and want to be have attention to details. Safety and lighting, also a welcoming spot. So this does not really convey a lot of security or coziness if I'm looking for a place to stop. I know there isn't a charger here, but the big takeaway is lighting is important. Thinking about safety is important. Jane Jacobs, eyes on the street. Probably want to have eyes on your charger, particularly if it's a very expensive piece of equipment. So I think there's some things that we kind of know as city planners, but we can translate to site development as it relates to EVs. Don't let your eyes fool you. That's not an EV. So that's someone, that Tesla, they're icing. That's when you get iced. That person just got iced, whoever was supposed to park there. That's cute that they try to make it look like an EV, but it's not an EV. So
You guys, come on.
yeah. So thinking about this and how can we make sure that we have policies, but also expectations in education as the bigger picture of electric vehicle charging. Oh, hate it. I mean, that is ground meat. I share. I think that's correct. Again, some vandalism that can occur. Going back to making sure that these are locations that are well lit, but also probably have eyes on them.
Yes, this was in Germany, so we'll say it's a German issue. Hopefully it doesn't happen.
Yeah. I believe this was actually local, Sherry. So
Bolton.
vandalism. Oh, go on. I'm not sure if we lost Sherry or not. Can you all still hear me?
Credit card piece there that they have also broken that off. So yeah, there are lots of things. This one was originally put in a less populated area. So that was one of the lessons learned from Smart Columbus, is to make sure that you do have good eyes on it, as Jan was saying earlier.
And despite the dog didn't do it. The dog in the photo. Safety. So thinking about the integrity of the materials you're using, making sure that you are having regular checks of the material, the quality of the infrastructure, I should say. So maintenance is going to be part of the picture as well, and making sure that you're not creating any additional safety hazards with this technology.
Mm-hmm.
So Sherry, help me out with this one because I want to make sure I get this right. The left one is probably accessibility, but yeah, please.
Yeah, so what we're trying to convey here is that don't think that you have to make everything all brand new and that you've got to bore a ton of lines. It's really, as you're thinking about planning for these, thinking about a way to minimize the cost and the impact to the existing structure. So on the left-hand side, there's a parking garage there, but it didn't make sense for them to put them into the parking garage. They kept it outside to make it easier, less cost prohibitive, all those things. And then on the right side, you can see this one's even more interesting. They needed it inside the parking garage, but they built in the pipes to put it through versus boring through the actual concrete to run the pipes. They're just doing it on the outside. It's not as pretty, right? It's not beautiful. And we could argue whether this one's ADA appropriate, that one probably isn't, but there are different ways to be able to create these that don't mean wrecking the existing infrastructure that you have. So some of it's being creative, similar to what Jan was showing with the line across the bike lane. What we've seen in other countries is that they actually have arms that come out and above the bike lane and back down to the vehicle to create an opportunity to charge, but still a very safe bike lane. So that's what we're looking for here.
Yeah, and acknowledging that the materials may be at a premium currently, and we'll see how long that continues. And thinking about contracts, so maintenance is important. We build it, we operate it, we also need to maintain it. And thinking about those contracts you may have with third parties, and making sure that that's contemplated in the contract, at least for the lifespan, maybe 5 years after installation, things of that nature. And then, of course, load management, always work with utilities to make sure that a site is appropriate for EVs, and can definitely handle everything that's happening on the site in addition to EVs. Sherry mentioned the pull-through earlier. So how do you accommodate vehicles that may be towing something or may need a pull-through orientation as it relates to parking, rather than what we see every day? So this is something that you should probably think about, right? Like, what does that look like if you have certain vehicles that need to have a pull-through and need to also have electric vehicle charging? And then finally looking at accessibility. We mentioned this a few times, but I don't think we should lose sight of that, particularly as we introduce electric vehicle parking, making sure that we can be inclusive and have it accessible for all that need it.
And I think the signing there is important. It says use last, right? Doesn't mean you can't use it. Kind
Right.
of like the restrooms, right? It's a use last situation, just to make sure that they are still all able to be used.
Thank you, Sherry.
Mhm.
And so as we're thinking about accessibility, making sure that we have the proper spacing and the measurements that can accommodate different users, and making sure that you can also include other things, looking at the US Access Board for ideas to have more inclusivity, not just for EVs, but perhaps the transportation system as a whole. I know you've probably seen some of these photos. The haters like to post them, but thinking about, I think this example is in the UK. Is that right, Sherry? The one with the pooling Teslas.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's why we need the planners on the phone, right? The planner wouldn't have let this happen.
Never, never, none of the planners on these phones and our engineering friends. But thinking about the site conditions, thinking about the water runoff, we need our friends in engineering and other disciplines to help us with some of the site work. Also, we should educate them in terms of what they can expect and what our expectations are as planners working with developers. And of course, the snow operation. So not only thinking about the site appropriateness, but also thinking about our weather in Ohio, particularly our friends along the lake. Snow will be something you need to think about, particularly as it relates to public charging.
So as we're doing a lot of the planning across the different states and in Ohio with contracting with new vendors, we're saying the O&M, the maintenance part of that isn't shove all of your snow from the gas station in front of the chargers. You need to keep the chargers open from snow too. So come up with a new plan. So.
And this is kind of along the same vein, but this is a cool concept where you have a solar array that's part of a structure that has EVs incorporated into it. But you also see there's a plate, I think, at the bottom to help with the whole stability of the system. That is fine in some of the warmer climates, but that can be problematic with a snowplow, particularly in a so there are going to be really cool solutions, but you need to think about our climate as well as other conditions in Ohio as we think about EVs and some of the products that are out there. So this is, I hope this is a great slide for our planners on the call. But as we look at site development and thinking about policies, particularly as we talk to private developers and even our own city projects or municipal projects, these are some really good points. And again, this is recorded. One that really spoke to me was the parking spaces. So I know we like to do, maybe it's like one EV parking spot for every 5 or 50, excuse me, like regular traditional parking spots. That is fine, but if you have, smaller parking spots, the percentage is probably something that you want to hone in on, particularly as it relates to the percentage of EV vehicles or EV ready parking spots that are part of a plan. So these continue on with electric utilities, coordination with them. We mentioned site feasibility for stormwater, but also other considerations. Safety should be one of the driving factors of this because we want to help help this technology can take root, particularly if it helps with lower emissions. And so safety is something we want to make sure that it's front and center as we're looking at the public. And then ADA compliance, being inclusive of the users that can use this technology, and also making sure that these spots have compliance with ADA. As we continue down the best practices.
A little bit here, Jam.
Yes, please.
The difference between these two. The one before is really thinking about all development, especially private development, right? If you guys are creating new rules, new requirements, things, these are the areas that you might want to be looking at to say, here's the new requirements that you're going to need. Or if you're helping people and you're putting best practices out there for private developers that say, I don't know what to do, but I want a charger. Here's a lot of those. What Jam's going to talk about next really focuses on when we were thinking about what does Dublin need to do. If Dublin wants to be the owner operator of these, or the owner but have someone else operate and maintain them, what do they need to be thinking about on top of that? And so things like in the middle one for standards and integration, pricing transparency, right? And some of these private developments, you're not going to, if you don't have a skin in the game, you're not going to be able to have that. But in this situation, these are things that Dublin can force in their contract to make sure that they have a good product for their citizens and users.
Thank you, Sherry, for noticing that and pointing it out. I appreciate that. But yeah, absolutely. So we'll jump into funding opportunities and round it out.
Yep, 1 minute on
Sure.
funding. A lot of people in the past were like, hey, go to your local electric utility. They've got funding options. They don't anymore because the feds came out with funding options. So they're like, hey, why would we do it? So everyone's focused now on the federal money, but these are 3 grants that are no longer available. The next page does have a listing of all the different funding opportunities that exist right now. But what I'll tell you, you can see like CMAQ is on there as the 5th bullet. It's unlikely that a lot of CMAQ funds are going to be used for that right now because they have other roadway projects in the loop that they've been waiting to fund for a while. So we really need to focus on those top 2. That's the NEVI program, which the state administers, and then the CFI grant, which we'll talk about next. So this is all of the federal funding from that IIJA, BIL, whatever you want to call it, is out there. So there's $7.5 billion that's focused on it. Again, that $5 billion is focused on NEVI, administered by the state. And the state is doing that to build out the national infrastructure on the alternative fuel vehicle corridors, which you see in the map on the right. They are having a meeting right now talking about how are they going to use the money after that's built out? How are they going to get this money into the communities around the state of Ohio? So this is where you come in, building your relationship with Drive Ohio, which is the emerging technology arm of ODOT, to say, how do I get to be involved in this, and how do I get to sign up for this funding? The other half, the $2.5 billion, is CFI. It can be gone after by any local government or government entity. And that funding, again, anybody can go after. If you want to flip to the next page, and they all are 80-20 splits, 80% funding from grant, 20% generally to the industry partner who's going to be doing the installation. But here is actually the Mid-Ohio region's CFI grant submittal that went in. They're waiting to hear back, hopefully soon by January, whether they were selected for that. I wrote down, I heard earlier that Ohio's fair share of this funding could be around $70 million over the 5 years that this is going to be out. So we want everyone to go out and apply for this money to be able to bring chargers to your neighborhood and area in your region so that we can get this funding back in Ohio.
Yeah, and finally, as part of that CFI, and part of that grant that was just submitted, Dublin's share is we submitted 3 locations. So our rec center, DCRC, the Dublin Community Recreation Center, the mobility hub that we have contemplated as part of the refresh and upgrades that are happening there, Dakota Park and Ride in our Bridge Park area, and then Dari Fields Park, as Sherry mentioned, very used for a lot of tournaments, competitions, sporting events, things of that nature. So that is our presentation. It was a lot, but really appreciate the opportunity to share some of that and open it up for questions.
Perfect. Okay, we have just a couple minutes here, and there's some really good questions. The first one, for staff using e-bikes, are they insured as part of the auto insurance policy, like of their own policy? Does the city have to carry special insurance? Because we're planners. We can ride bikes, but sometimes we can't.
Of course. I should mention that we did include helmets for all of those, and we worked with our risk manager, and so they were aware of everything. I just told them what we did. They probably handled the insurance side of it, to be honest. And I have to make sure that you have to wear a helmet. Like, people can have that option not to wear a helmet, but if I see you, or a city manager sees you, or a risk manager sees you, you better be wearing a helmet.
I love it. Okay, perfect. We were just talking about incentives and the money that's out there to, do these fleets. Are are they available for more than just cities? Like, can a township apply for something like this, or are they better suited to go to their county? How does that dynamic work? Do we know?
The funding that we talked about was CFI, that
Mhm.
is available for any governmental entity, MPOs, townships, governments, anybody
Okay.
who wants to go after it. I will say regional approaches get better scores and points. So it is good to have good partners and have some of those private partners on board too. But the Drive Ohio website also has like a packet of information for anybody interested in going after a CFI grant to help you.
Okay, great. I know I'm pretty sure I mentioned this to you, JM, like back when we were doing our session at the state conference. And I've mentioned this to people before. Do you have a good relationship with your utility company? And have you had conversations with them up front about like, all right, so we want to electrify our fleet at the city, but we're also expecting, just based on nationwide trends, that this is what we're going to be seeing in the future. And can our grid support it? Like, what do we need to do? What kind of conversations do we need to have to make sure that we don't end up in trouble in the near future?
Yeah, I do not work with utilities personally, but I would imagine that our relationship is pretty good given that we are continuing to expand our fleet, but also the infrastructure that follows it. So there has been coordination that's occurred, and there's more than one utility in Dublin. So you want to make sure that you're talking to the right one for the site that you're talking to. That's probably the first step. Um, but yes, you need to have those conversations early and often, just like we tell our public with the planning that we do. Come visit us early and often, particularly if you're looking at a project that may be more significant and may need to have those conversations about power supply.
So the utilities are actually getting separate funding from the feds to build out their grid because they
Interesting.
know
Very good.
that
Yeah.
it is a problem. I was speaking in Austin and I was sitting with someone with Austin Utility there who said, we're ancient. We haven't had to change, so we didn't change. And so they're trying to do a lot in this because they see it coming, right? They're getting requests left and right, and they can't even respond to them because they don't know. So they're trying to get everything up. And I think they're being great partners in this, especially AEP. And there's two others in Dublin, I think in Ohio, they're being great. And the state of Ohio is also having conversations with all of them across the state to make sure they know it's coming and that there's no surprises.
In terms of surprises, this is something that I have been questioning, and I know I've been getting a lot of questions from our membership about the implications on zoning. Are there did you make any zoning amendments or any kind of clarifications or procedural things to, I guess, not so much for your fleets, but for any future electric vehicle charging, whether it be on public property, private property, homes? I know we're kind of getting into then like building code type things, but specifically zoning ordinances. Have you done anything?
We haven't passed any ordinances. I should know that we are in the middle of our update to our community plan called Envision Dublin. There may be some changes that come of that once the community plan is finished and then zoning is tackled. But where we're landing with it is talking to city planners, we have to be thoughtful about the difference between charging short term and then it becoming more of a long term kind of like a gas station. So when I say that, it's like, are you providing charging for your office workers, or are you also adding more trips to your site by creating new work, people who don't work there but want to use a public charger? So we're going to have to work with our planning team to figure out what is the differentiation going to be ultimately. And we have to be careful when we propose certain things, right? Like, yes, we want to make sure that we're providing electrification to consumers, office workers of a site. But if we start bringing in new people, then is it a gas station kind of thing?
Right. And to that, I've asked several people in the field on the private side of chargers. And I say, so eventually, like not tomorrow, not in 10 years, maybe 50 years, 60 years, whatever, will the gas station, half of them be electric, like superchargers, and half of them, be regular gas, and then eventually it just be electric chargers? Like, or is everyone just going to do it at home? Like, what are you seeing as the trends? And it is all over the board. No one really knows the answer to that yet. It's It's a little wild.
I think you're right. Well, at one point we were talking about, right, like propane tanks. Like you would go and just swap your battery out at a gas station, not even charge. You just
Not even. Oh, that's interesting. Oh yeah, like a propane tank. I get it. Oh, that's interesting. See, there's another angle that I didn't even
totally
know about.
different.
This is just it's sort of like a stay tuned situation. Okay, let's see. We can probably get one more question in. Oh, let's talk about the gas tax, shall we? Any thoughts on the implications of EVs on funding programs that utilize gas tax? And I know that's kind of farther down the road. And again, I also know that, you know, we've had these discussions before, and there are certain taxes that electric vehicle owners pay that, you know, those that use gasoline in their vehicles don't pay to kind of make up for it. But what are you hearing about the things?
Sherry, do you want your thoughts or my thoughts? I mean, I'll just go forward. I mean, from working for the city perspective, I mean, for us, the benefit is having the cleaner air and having less emissions. So to me personally, I'm okay. It's not up to me, but I see the benefits that are not as relevant as just going to they're not paying their fair share of gas tax because they use EVs, but at the same time, they're providing a benefit in some capacity. So that's why I see it.
Yeah, so I'm working on with the state of Oklahoma DOT. We are doing a road user charge pilot. It's just finishing up right now. And we see across the country, right, everybody's looking at it and saying, is gas tax really the future? Gas taxes are going down as cars become more fuel efficient, as we have differently fueled vehicles. So the states are all saying our costs are going up or even remaining stable, and we can't afford this. So something has to change with the gas tax. There's going to be a federal road user charge pilot. They're putting together the kind of the panel for it now, and then they're going to go ahead and bid that out to do it across every state. And so I think we're going to see a major shift in the gas tax, and it may go away completely. It may just become like a user fee, maybe based on road miles used, or if you don't want people to track your miles, you can just pay a higher fee. I think that we're going to see a lot of changes there. So stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned.
I should note real quick, we do not charge any fees for the public chargers in Dublin. So I don't know how long that's going to last, but at least we see the benefit and we're okay with that subsidy.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap up. A couple quick things. Please don't hit the X yet. We're recording this. I will send the link out to everyone after so you can, share it amongst your colleagues. Also in the background, maybe you can sort of see it. The Guide to Planning in Ohio, the second edition. Y'all, I ordered it. We have it ready. It's 318 pages of the most interesting planning related material specific to Ohio. You might even have the first edition on your bookshelf back from 2007. But we're going to have them, and they will be available to order probably by the end of next week, which is really exciting because this has been a very long journey for us. More info will be available on our website, ohioplanning.org. And lastly, in terms of this type of 1 hour lunchtime webinar, I have been getting a lot of messages regarding the recent marijuana situation that we have going on that I know a lot of our planners are wondering what the implications are to planning. We did release a memo last week with some resources, but we are trying to get a webinar together to talk about this and brainstorm and figure out kind of what the implications of things are to our everyday planning work. So stay tuned for that. And if you have any resources or anyone that you think might be good for this, send them my way so we can get this together sooner rather than later. So everyone, thanks for joining us today. JM, thank you. I sort of voluntold you to do this, but I really appreciate it. And I knew you were doing such great work. Sherry, it was so nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us today. Everyone, hey, have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.